I spent the last 20 years pouring every dime I had into building what became the largest privately held ranch in West Texas. 427,000 acres of prime grazing land, mineral rights, and water leases, worth north of $380 million. Only to watch my own daughter-in-law stand up at my son's 40th birthday party in Austin, microphone in hand, and announce to 200 guests that I was a charity case who needed to be moved into low-income housing because poor old Eleanor can't even afford her own utilities anymore. She laughed, raised her champagne flute, and suggested a GoFundMe right there on the spot, while my son just smirked beside her. The crystal chandeliers in that rented ballroom caught the light like knives. 200 faces turned toward me at the head table, some pitying, most smirking along with her. I sat there in the plain black dress I'd worn for 20 years of ranch work, the one with the faded seam on the shoulder, and felt the weight of every acre I'd bought, every well I'd drilled, every contract I'd negotiated after my husband died in that oil field accident. All of it invisible to them. My daughter-in-law Vanessa leaned into the mic again, voice dripping with concern that didn't reach her eyes. She said she and my son Travis had been quietly carrying the burden for months, covering my property taxes and grocery bills because I refused to sell off pieces of that dusty old land to support myself. She even waved around a printed spreadsheet, fake numbers of course, claiming I was $127,000 in the red and at risk of foreclosure. The crowd murmured. A few phones came out. Someone started clapping like she'd just performed an act of saintly charity. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up. I simply folded my hands on the linen tablecloth and studied the way her diamond tennis bracelet, paid for with the $4,200 monthly transfers she'd convinced Travis to stop sending me 3 months earlier, sparkled under the lights. Those transfers had never been charity. They were rent. The 5-bedroom house they lived in, the one with the infinity pool overlooking the hill country, sat on 2,400 acres of my deeded land, under a long-term lease they thought was a family favor. They had no idea the lease was revocable at the sole trustee's discretion. Travis finally took the mic and said, with that same half-smile he'd worn since childhood whenever he wanted something, that they'd already spoken to a senior care attorney about a guardianship petition. For my own good, of course. He said a competency evaluation would be best, just to make sure I wasn't being taken advantage of in my declining years. The words landed like ice water down my spine. Declining years. I was 68, rode fence lines 3 days a week, and could still read a balance sheet faster than any banker in Midland. The rest of the night blurred into forced smiles and awkward hugs. Vanessa hugged me tight for the cameras, whispering in my ear that it was time to stop playing pioneer and let the next generation handle things. Her perfume smelled like money and entitlement. When I got back to the modest cabin I kept on the ranch, the one with the 12-year-old truck parked out front, I sat at the kitchen table under the single hanging bulb and stared at the manila envelope the ranch attorney had delivered that morning. Inside were the first forensic audit pages showing forged signatures on a revocable trust document they'd tried to slip through county records 2 weeks earlier. They'd attempted to move that 2,400-acre parcel into a joint account they controlled. The auditor's red ink was still wet on the pages. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a chipped glass and let the burn settle. For the first time in months, the knot in my chest loosened. Not from sadness, but from something colder. Clarity. They had spent years treating me like a walking ATM that had finally run dry. Vanessa loved posting on social media about her self-made lifestyle while cashing checks from the mineral royalties she didn't know were still titled in my name. Travis had quietly stopped every automatic transfer the moment she convinced him I was holding them back. They thought they'd isolated me. They had no idea I'd been watching every transaction, every late-night wire, every email forwarded by the trust administrator who had stayed loyal for 23 years. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch listening to the coyotes and the low hum of the security system arming itself with a soft beep. The same system that had recorded Vanessa's last unannounced visit when she'd tried to pressure me into signing a power of attorney for estate planning. I still had the time-stamped footage. By sunrise, I had already placed the first call to the forensic accountant in Dallas. No shouting, no tears, just the quiet click of numbers falling into place. The humiliation at that birthday party wasn't the end. It was the match. They had publicly declared me broke, incompetent, and burdensome in front of everyone who mattered in our circle. They had tried to strip me of dignity and assets in one calculated evening. What they didn't understand, what they were about to learn in the most public, merciless way possible, was that every acre, every barrel of oil, every head of cattle, and every dollar that had ever flowed through their lives still answered to one name on the irrevocable family trust documents: mine. I finished the bourbon, set the glass down, and watched the first light touch the eastern pasture. Somewhere out there, the ranch I had built from nothing after burying my husband was waking up, and for the first time in years, I smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind of smile that comes right before the paperwork drops and changes everything. That night after the party, long after the last taillights had disappeared down the county road, I sat on the porch of the cabin with the bourbon glass still in my hand and let the memories roll in like a slow-moving dust storm. 23 years earlier, almost to the day, I had stood in the same spot, holding a folded flag and a death certificate that said my husband Jack had been killed in a drilling rig collapse outside Odessa. The ranch at that time was barely 8,000 acres of mesquite and caliche, a mortgage that ate every calf crop, and a 12-year-old son who thought the world was supposed to keep handing him things just because his father had once worn a hard hat. I never cried in public. I signed the insurance papers, cashed the modest settlement, and did what no one expected a 50-year-old widow with no college degree to do. I kept the ranch alive. Every dime from the life insurance went straight into buying the first water right lease from the neighbor who was ready to walk away. I drove the same battered truck Jack left behind, wore the same faded canvas jacket, and slept 4 hours a night so I could be on the tractor at dawn. The mineral rights under the south pasture that everyone said were worthless, I paid a wildcatter $11,400 out of pocket to run a test well. It came in at 700 barrels a day. That single well paid for the next 30,000 acres I bought at tax auction in 2008 when the banks were bleeding. I lived small on purpose. The cabin had one bathroom and a wood stove, because every extra dollar went back into the land. No vacations, no fancy truck, no country club dues. Travis grew up watching me balance the books at the kitchen table under that same hanging bulb. But somewhere along the line, he decided the numbers on the page belonged to him, not to the woman who had clawed them into existence. When he brought Vanessa home from Austin at 24, she took one look at the modest cabin, the 12-year-old truck, and the plain black dress I still wear, and decided I was an embarrassment that needed fixing. At first, it was small things. She would compliment the ranch in that syrupy voice while her eyes calculated square footage. Then the request started. A temporary loan of $38,000 so Travis could expand his consulting business. Another $62,000 6 months later for the down payment on the 5-bedroom house they built on what they called family land. I wired both amounts without argument, but I made sure the deeds stayed in the irrevocable family trust, with me as sole trustee. They never asked to see the trust documents. Why would they? I was just poor old Eleanor who couldn't even afford new tires. The financial abuse crept in like bindweed. Vanessa convinced Travis that the $4,200 monthly transfer I had been sending since he turned 30 wasn't support. It was an entitlement. She started referring to it as Mom's contribution in front of their friends. Then, 3 months before the birthday party, the transfers simply stopped. No explanation. When I called to ask, Travis told me they were restructuring their budget and that I should consider selling off a section or two of that useless scrub to cover my own bills. Vanessa followed up with a text that read like concern but felt like a scalpel. "We just want what's best for you, Eleanor. You've worked so hard. Time to let go." I didn't argue. I simply opened the second set of books I kept in the gun safe. the ones that tracked every dime they had ever taken. Over 36 months, they had pulled $151,200 in loans and contributions that were never repaid. The house they lived in sat on 2,400 acres I leased to them at $1 a year because I still believed family meant something. The mineral royalties that paid for Vanessa's diamond bracelet and the infinity pool? Those checks had my name on them, routed through the trust administrator who had never once leaked a detail. The first real red flag came when the county clerk's office called me about a strange filing. Someone had tried to record a new revocable trust document that listed Travis and Vanessa as co-trustees over the 2,400-acre parcel. The signature on the bottom was close to mine, but not close enough. The notary stamp was forged. I thanked the clerk, hung up, and felt the cold fury settle into my bones like winter coming down from the panhandle. They weren't just siphoning money anymore. They were trying to steal the ground under their own feet while publicly painting me as the broke, incompetent burden who needed saving. I drove into Midland the next morning in the same old truck, still wearing the same plain black dress. The forensic accountant I hired that afternoon was a retired IRS special agent who specialized in family trust litigation. He listened without interrupting while I laid out the numbers, the forged filing, and the sudden cutoff of the monthly transfers. When I showed him the spreadsheet Vanessa had waved at the birthday party, claiming I was $127,000 in the red, he actually laughed once, a short, dry sound, and said the only thing in the red was their future if they kept playing games with irrevocable trust law. I didn't tell Travis or Vanessa I had started digging. I let them keep posting their vacation photos and their humble brag captions about taking care of family. I let Vanessa continue calling me Mom in that fake sweet tone while she quietly shopped for senior living brochures behind my back. I let them believe the modest cabin and the faded truck meant I was finished. Every night, I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed the fresh pages the accountant emailed over. Bank records, wire histories, the metadata on the forged trust document showing it had been created on Vanessa's laptop at 2:17 a.m. one night when she thought I was already asleep. The security footage from the porch camera caught her slipping an envelope into my mailbox the week before the party. An envelope that contained a blank power of attorney form she hoped I would sign without reading. The camera also caught her expression when she realized I wasn't home. Pure irritation that her little errand had been wasted. I never raised my voice. I never sent a single angry text. I simply kept feeding the accountant more rope while the ranch kept producing, the wells kept pumping, and the trust kept growing. They had spent years treating me like the charity case they announced at that microphone. They had no idea the charity case owned the deed to the land their entire lifestyle rested on. The irrevocable trust that made every asset untouchable unless I said otherwise, and the cold, patient plan that was about to turn their public humiliation of me into the last mistake they would ever make on my property. By the time the sun came up the morning after the party, the first phase of the paperwork was already in motion. The ranch I had built from nothing after burying my husband was no longer just land and cattle and oil. It had become the instrument of the coldest justice I had ever served. And I was only getting started. The weeks that followed the birthday party became a masterclass in silence. I went about my ranch routine exactly as I always had, checking water troughs at dawn, reviewing the weekly cattle weights with the foreman, signing off on the latest mineral lease payment that still carried my name as sole beneficiary, but inside, I was building a case file thick enough to bury them. The forensic accountant, a man named Harlan, who had spent 30 years chasing crooked fiduciaries for the IRS, turned my kitchen table into a war room every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. He arrived in an unmarked sedan, never used the front door twice in a row, and spread fresh bank statements across the scarred oak like a poker player laying down a winning hand. We started with the obvious. The $4,200 monthly transfers I had made for 8 straight years totaled $403,200 before they abruptly ended. Harlan pulled the wire histories from the trust account and showed me the exact date Travis had instructed the bank to reroute them into a joint checking account he shared with Vanessa. No note, no conversation, just a one-line memo that read, "Family adjustment." Harlan's red pen circled the metadata. The request had originated from an IP address registered to the Wi-Fi at their infinity pool house. That was strike one. Strike two came when we traced the forged revocable trust filing. The county clerk had been kind enough to send the scanned original after I explained it was a matter of protecting an elderly widow's estate. The signature looked convincing until Harlan ran it through his forensic software. The pressure points didn't match my usual pen stroke. The notary seal had been lifted from an old document and photoshopped. The creation timestamp on the PDF was 2:17 a.m. on a night Vanessa's phone had pinged a tower 3 miles from my cabin. She had driven out, slipped the blank power of attorney form into my mailbox, and left, thinking I would sign it the next morning like the feeble old woman she believed I was. The porch camera caught every second in crystal 4K. Her silhouette under the security light, the manila envelope in her hand, the irritated glance she threw at the dark windows when she realized I wasn't home. Harlan didn't smile when he showed me the footage. He simply slid another stack of papers across the table and said the words that made the bourbon taste sweeter later that night. They tried to create a parallel trust to siphon the 2,400-acre parcel. If it had gone through, they could have quietly deeded it to themselves, then used it as collateral for a $9.2 million line of credit. The bank would have never known the original irrevocable trust still controlled the deed. I asked him how close they came. He tapped the rejection stamp from the county recorder's office and answered, 3 business days. That was how long I had between their birthday party performance and the moment they would have owned the ground under their own swimming pool. We kept digging. I gave Harlan full access to every account I controlled through the trust. He discovered Vanessa had been using a shell LLC registered in Delaware to route consulting fees from Travis's business straight into a crypto wallet. The wallet held $187,000 in Bitcoin, purchased with funds that originated from the mineral royalties I had never stopped receiving. She had been smart enough to hide the trail from Travis, but not smart enough to hide it from a man who once audited Enron. Harlan printed the blockchain transaction log and laid it beside the spreadsheet Vanessa had waved at the party, the one claiming I was $127,000 in the red. The irony sat on the table between us like a loaded revolver. I never once raised my voice during those sessions. I didn't need to. Every new page Harlan uncovered fed the cold fury that had replaced the initial sting of humiliation. They had spent years gaslighting me into believing I was the burden, the charity case, the outdated pioneer who needed saving. Meanwhile, they were living on leased land, cashing royalty checks they didn't own, and quietly forging documents to steal the one asset that had never belonged to them. The house they called their dream home was built on a revocable lease that contained a single paragraph I had insisted on 20 years earlier. At the sole trustee's discretion, the lease could be terminated with 30 days written notice for any reason. That paragraph was about to become the most expensive 30 days of their lives. By the end of the 4th week, we had a binder 3 inches thick. Bank records, email chains forwarded by the trust administrator who had stayed loyal, the Ring doorbell footage of Vanessa's late-night mailbox drop, the forensic report on the forged signature, and a preliminary valuation showing the 2,400-acre parcel alone was now worth $18.7 million, thanks to the new fracking lease I had signed 6 months earlier, without telling a soul. Harlan slid the final summary across the table and asked if I was ready to move from investigation to execution. I looked at the manila envelope he had prepared, sick with every piece of evidence, and told him I had never been more ready in my life. While they continued their lives, posting vacation reels from a beach in Cabo that the mineral money had paid for, I sat in the cabin and reviewed the documents one last time. The security system beeped softly each night when I armed it. The stale scent of Vanessa's perfume still clung to the old cardigan she had left behind on her last visit, a reminder I kept folded on the back of a chair. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I left it there like a trophy. The silent phase was ending. The next call I made was to the ranch attorney in Midland. I instructed him to prepare the 30-day eviction notice for the house on the hill. the formal revocation of any beneficiary status Travis and Vanessa still held under the trust, and the counter-petition for a mental competency evaluation. Only this time, the evaluation would be on them, backed by the very forensic accountant they had tried to use against me. I told the attorney to hold everything until Labor Day weekend. Their annual barbecue was already on the calendar, the one they threw every year on the back patio overlooking the ranch land they thought they owned. I hung up the phone, poured the last of the bourbon, and stared out at the dark pasture where the cattle moved like slow shadows under the moon. They had humiliated me in public, tried to strip me of dignity and assets in one calculated evening, and believed they had won. What they didn't know, what they were about to learn in front of the same 200 people who had laughed at me, was that the paperwork was already printed, the sheriff's deputies already on standby, and the irrevocable trust I controlled was about to drop like a guillotine. The ranch kept producing, the wells kept pumping, and I kept smiling that cold, patient smile every time the phone rang, and it was Travis or Vanessa, pretending nothing had changed. The summer dragged on in that deceptive way Texas heat has, where everything feels frozen in place, even as the calendar pages turn. I kept the ranch running like clockwork. Morning rides to check the north fence line, afternoon meetings with the mineral lease engineer about the new fracking pads coming online in October, but every spare minute belonged to the quiet machinery of the takedown. The ranch attorney in Midland, a man named Reynolds who had drawn up the original irrevocable family trust 23 years earlier, met me at the cabin every other Friday. He arrived with a fresh stack of manila envelopes, never used the same route twice, and we reviewed documents under the single hanging bulb while the security system's soft beep reminded me the cameras were still rolling. First came the formal revocation of any lingering power of attorney they might try to claim. I had never signed the blank form Vanessa slipped into my mailbox, but Reynolds filed the revocation anyway, dated it the day after the birthday party, and sent certified copies to every bank and title company that held records on the trust. The paperwork was surgical. A single-page declaration stating that Eleanor Marie Whitaker retained sole trustee authority over the irrevocable family trust, and that any prior or attempted delegation of authority was null and void. He slid it across the table and told me the filing fee was $87. I paid it in cash from the petty cash drawer and felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of tightening a noose they couldn't see. Next, we prepared the 30-day eviction notice for the house on the hill. The lease agreement they had treated like a gift for 7 years contained the paragraph I had insisted on when Travis first asked to build there. At the sole trustee's discretion, the lease could be terminated with 30 days written notice for any reason, including but not limited to attempted fraudulent transfer of deeded parcels. Reynolds printed the notice on heavy bond paper, attached the legal description of the 2,400-acre tract, and included the current fair market valuation of $18.7 million. The cover letter was 3 lines long and ended with the words, "Possession must be surrendered no later than 5 p.m. on September 7, 2025. He asked if I wanted any softening language. I told him to leave it exactly as written. While those documents sat in his safe waiting for Labor Day, I let Travis and Vanessa keep living in their fantasy. The texts kept coming. Travis sent me a message on a random Tuesday, claiming they had found a lovely assisted living facility outside San Antonio, with a waiting list I should get on before it filled up. Vanessa followed up the next morning with a voice memo she thought was private, telling her friends at the country club that poor old Eleanor was finally seeing reason, and that they were just trying to do the right thing before she lost the ranch to back taxes. I saved every recording. The Ring doorbell caught her driving past the cabin twice that week, slowing down each time as if checking whether I had already packed my bags. Harlan, the forensic accountant, delivered his final report the last week of July. He had traced the Shell LLC back to Vanessa's Delaware registration and matched the crypto wallet transactions to the exact mineral royalty deposits I had never stopped receiving. The numbers were precise: $187,400 diverted over 28 months. He also flagged the attempted deed transfer as a clear violation of Texas trust law, complete with a draft affidavit for criminal referral to the district attorney if I chose to press charges. I told him to keep the referral in reserve. The eviction and the trust revocation would hurt them more than any courtroom spectacle. Harlan closed his laptop, looked at me across the kitchen table, and said the only thing that mattered. They have no idea what's coming. I never answered a single text. I never called them back. When Vanessa showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon in her white SUV, wearing the same diamond tennis bracelet that had sparkled under the birthday party lights, I met her on the porch in my faded black dress and listened while she prattled on about how stressed Travis was and how they had hired a financial planner to help me get my affairs in order. She even brought a fresh set of senior living brochures, the glossy kind with smiling, gray-haired couples on the cover. I took the brochures, thanked her in the same flat voice I had used for months, and watched her drive away. The security camera recorded the entire exchange, including the way her smile faltered when I didn't invite her inside. By the middle of August, the paperwork was complete. Reynolds had the sheriff's department on standby for service on Labor Day weekend. The counter-petition for a mental competency evaluation, filed in Travis and Vanessa's names this time, supported by Harlan's forensic findings, was sealed and ready. The bank had been notified that any joint account activity tied to the trust required my personal signature going forward. I even updated the beneficiary designations on the life insurance policy I still carried, removing them both and directing everything to a scholarship fund for ranch kids in Midland County. The ranch kept producing, the wells kept pumping, and I kept driving the same 12-year-old truck, wearing the same plain black dress, letting them believe I was still the charity case they had mocked in front of 200 witnesses. The final piece clicked into place the Thursday before Labor Day. Reynolds called me from his office and confirmed the eviction notice, the trust revocation, and the competency counter-petition would all be served simultaneously at their annual barbecue. The same crowd that had laughed at my spreadsheet humiliation would watch the sheriff's deputies hand them the manila envelopes. I thanked him, hung up, and sat on the porch listening to the coyotes. The stale scent of Vanessa's perfume still lingered on the old cardigan draped over the chair. I left it there. They had spent the entire summer gaslighting me, posting their vacation pictures and quietly planning how to liquidate what they thought was already theirs. They had no idea the irrevocable trust I controlled was about to revoke every privilege they had ever taken for granted. The house on the hill, the infinity pool, the lifestyle funded by royalties they didn't own. All of it was about to become subject to a 30-day clock and a set of legal documents colder than any Texas winter. I poured the last of the bourbon, watched the sun drop behind the western pasture, and felt the quiet click of the final tumbler falling into place. The silent phase was over, the paperwork was armed, and in 4 days, the same people who had humiliated me at that microphone would learn exactly how expensive their arrogance had become. The Labor Day weekend barbecue on the hill was already in full swing by the time I pulled up in the same 12-year-old truck, the engine ticking in the late afternoon heat like a countdown. Their back patio overlooked the 2,400-acre parcel they still believed was theirs. The infinity pool glittering under strings of fairy lights, the smell of mesquite smoke and expensive brisket drifting across the lawn where 200 of the same faces from the birthday party milled around with plastic plates and cold beers. Vanessa had gone all out this year. Caterers in white shirts, a live country band, and a rented photo booth where guests could pose with oversized cowboy hats. She was in her element, laughing that high, practiced laugh, while Travis manned the smoker in a new linen shirt that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. I wore the same plain black dress, the one with the faded shoulder seam, and carried nothing but a small manila envelope of my own, empty, just for show. I had told Reynolds I wanted to be there when it happened, not to gloat, to watch. The sheriff's deputies were already parked down the service road in unmarked units, waiting for my signal. I walked straight through the crowd without a word. A few people recognized me and offered the same pitying smiles they had given me back in Austin. Someone even asked if I had decided on that assisted living place yet. I just nodded once and kept moving until I stood at the edge of the patio, bourbon glass in hand, half empty like always. Vanessa spotted me first. Her smile tightened the way it did whenever she had to pretend I mattered. She waved me over with that fake warm gesture, calling out across the music that I really should have let them pick me up instead of driving that old thing all the way from the cabin. Travis turned from the smoker, wiping his hands on a towel, and gave me the same half smirk he had worn at the birthday microphone. They thought this was another chance to love bomb me in public, to reinforce the narrative that poor old Eleanor was finally coming around. The band kept playing. The guests kept laughing. The fairy lights kept twinkling like nothing was about to shatter. At exactly 6:17 p.m., the two deputies stepped onto the patio in full uniform, badges catching the last of the sun. Reynolds had timed it perfectly. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. The music died mid-song when the lead deputy cleared his throat and asked for Travis Michael Whitaker and Vanessa Lynn Whitaker by name. The silence that dropped over the crowd was louder than any scream. Vanessa's champagne flute paused halfway to her lips. Travis set down his tongs so slowly the metal clinked against the grill like a starter pistol. The deputy handed Travis the first thick envelope, then Vanessa the second, reciting the contents in a flat West Texas drawl that carried to every corner of the patio. This is a 30-day eviction notice, pursuant to the revocable lease agreement on the 2,400-acre tract deeded to the Irrevocable Family Trust, controlled solely by Eleanor Marie Whitaker as trustee. Possession must be surrendered no later than 5 p.m. on September 7, 2025. The second envelope contained the formal revocation of beneficiary status under the trust, along with the forensic accountant's affidavit detailing the attempted fraudulent deed transfer and the $187,400 in diverted mineral royalties routed through the Delaware Shell LLC. The third document, the one that made Vanessa's diamond tennis bracelet look suddenly cheap, was the counter-petition for mental competency evaluations on both of them, supported by the same spreadsheet they had waved at my birthday party, now annotated in Harlan's red ink, showing every forged signature and every gaslighting text. The deputy wasn't finished. He pulled out the final page, a certified copy of the trust deed itself, and read the key paragraph aloud in front of the entire crowd. The one that stated the entire ranch, including the parcel under their house, remained locked inside an irrevocable family trust worth north of $380 million, with me as the sole trustee and no amendments possible without my explicit consent. The same trust that had paid for their infinity pool, their vacations, their lifestyle. The one they had tried to bypass with a forged revocable document created on Vanessa's laptop at 2:17 a.m. I stood there and watched it all unfold without moving a muscle. Vanessa's face went the color of old paper. She started to speak, voice cracking as she told the deputies there had to be some mistake, that they had been taking care of me, that I was confused and needed help. Travis tried the smirk again, but it slipped when the deputy handed him the Ring doorbell footage printouts, time-stamped the night she had slipped the power of attorney form into my mailbox. The crowd didn't murmur this time. They stared. Phones stayed in pockets. The same people who had clapped for her GoFundMe suggestion at the birthday party now shifted their weight like they were standing on ground that had just opened beneath them. I finally stepped forward, set my empty bourbon glass on the nearest table, and looked at both of them the way I had looked at balance sheets for 23 years. Cold, precise, final. I told them the ranch I had built after burying my husband had never been theirs to leverage, that the monthly transfers had been rent on land they no longer leased, and that the charity case they had humiliated in public was the same woman who now held the deed, the mineral rights, and every legal lever that mattered. No tears, no raised voice, just the quiet click of the manila envelopes changing hands and the soft beep of the security system on my phone as I armed the cabin cameras one last time from the patio. Vanessa tried one more time, stepping close enough that I caught the stale edge of her perfume on the evening breeze, whispering that we could work this out as family, that they had only wanted what was best. I let the words hang in the air until the deputy asked if they understood the notices. Travis nodded once, the smirk long gone, his eyes flicking to the guests who were already backing away like the brisket had suddenly gone cold. The band never started again. The caterers quietly packed up. The fairy lights stayed on, but the party was over. I turned and walked back through the crowd the same way I had come in. Plain black dress, 12-year-old truck waiting at the end of the drive. Behind me, I heard the first raised voices, Vanessa's sharp and Travis's low, the sound of chairs scraping as people made excuses to leave. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The paperwork had dropped exactly the way I had planned it, in front of the exact same audience that had watched them try to bury me alive with a microphone and a fake spreadsheet. The sun was setting behind the western pasture when I reached the cabin. The coyotes were already calling. I sat on the porch, poured the last of the bourbon, and listened to the low hum of the security system arming itself. The ranch I had clawed out of nothing after Jack died was still mine. Every acre, every well, every dollar. They had spent years treating me like the burden. In one afternoon, the burden had become the landlord, the trustee, and the last person on earth they would ever underestimate again. I finished the bourbon, set the glass down, and allowed myself the smallest smile. The cold one that had been waiting since the night of the birthday party. The takedown was complete. The boundaries were locked. And somewhere up on that hill, the house with the infinity pool now had 30 days to empty. The days after Labor Day unfolded with the same quiet precision I had used to build the ranch from 8,000 acres of mesquite and debt. I woke at dawn the next morning, saddled the same horse I had ridden for 15 years, and rode the north fence line while the eviction clock started ticking on the house up on the hill. The foreman met me at the equipment barn and asked if I wanted the crew to start prepping the 2,400-acre parcel for new grazing rotation once it was cleared. I told him yes, effective September 8th at 12:01 a.m. He didn't ask questions. He had seen the sheriff's vehicles leave the barbecue the night before and knew the score. Travis and Vanessa tried everything in those first 72 hours. The text started at 6:45 a.m. the morning after. Travis claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that the trust documents had to be outdated, that they had only ever acted out of love. Vanessa followed with a voice memo, voice shaking for the first time I had ever heard, saying they had hired their own attorney and would fight the eviction because family didn't treat family this way. I listened to every recording on speaker while I reviewed the morning production reports, then deleted them without replying. The Ring doorbell at the cabin caught their white SUV creeping past twice that week, slowing at the gate before turning around. They never got out. They knew the cameras were rolling. Reynolds called me on the fourth day with the final accounting. The forensic audit had been updated with the latest bank records they had been forced to produce under the trust's discovery clause. The diverted mineral royalties weren't $187,400 anymore. The Shell LLC had hidden an additional $94,000 in unreported consulting fees over the last 14 months. Total financial abuse? $281,400. He also confirmed the 2,400-acre parcel, now free of their lease, had a new fracking lease offer on the table for $3.2 million upfront plus royalties that would push the ranch's total valuation past $412 million by year-end. I thanked him, signed the electronic transfer to move the scholarship fund into final position, and hung up. No celebration, just the soft click of another ledger closing for good. On September 6th, the day before the eviction deadline, I received one last certified letter from their attorney. It was a desperate attempt at a guardianship petition reversal, complete with affidavits claiming I had acted under duress and was no longer mentally competent to manage the irrevocable family trust. Attached was a copy of the same fake spreadsheet from the birthday party, now annotated with their new narrative. I forwarded it to Harlan without comment. He responded within the hour, with a 3-page rebuttal backed by my latest mental competency evaluation. Voluntary, clean, and filed the week before the barbecue. The judge dismissed their petition the same afternoon. Game over. I drove up to the hill at 4:30 p.m. on September 7th in the 12-year-old truck, the plain black dress still on, the same half-empty bourbon glass riding shotgun. The moving trucks were already there. Vanessa stood on the front porch in designer jeans and bare feet, hair unwashed for the first time since I had known her, directing two movers who were loading the infinity pool lounge chairs. Travis was on the phone with their attorney, voice low and frantic. When they saw me pull up, they both froze. The same 200 guests weren't there this time, but the ranch hands who had gathered at a respectful distance to watch the final handover made their own kind of audience. I didn't get out of the truck. I simply rolled down the window and handed Reynolds the final set of documents through the glass. The full asset liquidation summary showing exactly what they had lost. The house they had built on leased land was now forfeit. The mineral royalties they had diverted were being clawed back through a civil judgment I had authorized that morning. Their names had been permanently removed from every beneficiary designation, every joint account, every future distribution the trust would ever make. The irrevocable family trust remained locked, tighter than it had been the day I signed it after Jack's funeral. I told them, voice flat and final, that the ranch I had clawed out of the ground after burying my husband had never needed their approval, their love bombing, or their gaslighting. It only needed me. And now it had me, without the dead weight. Vanessa started to speak, the same syrupy tone cracking into something raw and ugly, calling me heartless and saying I would regret this when I was old and alone. Travis just stared at the manila envelope in his hands like it had grown teeth. I let the words wash over me the way dust washes over a fence line in August, there and then gone. I told them the boundaries were absolute, that any further contact would trigger a restraining order already drafted and waiting, and that the charity case they had humiliated with a microphone now owned the ground they were standing on. Then I rolled the window up, put the truck in reverse, and left them there with the movers and the sunset painting the empty pool the color of old blood. The ranch kept producing that night and every night after. The wells pumped. The cattle grazed the newly cleared 2,400 acres by the end of the week. I sat on the porch of the cabin under the single hanging bulb, reviewing the latest balance sheet while the security system beeped softly when I armed it. The stale scent of Vanessa's perfume had finally faded from the old cardigan I had thrown into the burn barrel 2 days earlier. I didn't miss it. I didn't miss them. Travis and Vanessa moved into a rented apartment in Austin within the 30-day window. Their attorney sent one final cease and desist, trying to block the royalty clawback, but the judge denied it before lunch. I never answered another message. I never took another call. The scholarship fund for ranch kids in Midland County received its first $250,000 disbursement the following month, and the local paper ran a small article about it that never once mentioned their names. I still wear the same plain black dress. I still drive the same 12-year-old truck. But the weight that had pressed on my chest since the birthday party is gone, replaced by the clean, cold satisfaction of boundaries that will outlast me. The ranch I built alone after burying my husband is thriving without the people who tried to bury me while I was still breathing. They learned exactly how much they lost the day the paperwork dropped in front of everyone who mattered. And I learned that the only family I need is the one I control through an irrevocable trust, a set of deeds, and the quiet smile I allow myself every evening when the coyotes start calling. No reconciliation, no second chances. Just the land, the numbers, and the final, merciless click of the ledger closing for good.